Is everybody ready for our keynote speaker for Friday night? That's called pandering to my audience. All right, our keynote speaker for Friday night is here because of recent UFO events in the media have drawn a lot of attention by the public, U.S. Congress, those in the Department of Defense that are now tasked with investigating these incidents. He will be discussing how the stigma associated with reporting is changing, how private organizations are trying to assist the government with data collection, and how such partnerships might work to solve the mystery and to prepare for UFO and/or extraterrestrial contact. He will also discuss the results of his research at Georgetown University regarding the societal consequences of a global reality compromising event and whether the world is truly prepared for disclosure. We're all prepared for disclosure, but is the general public really ready to know what we know? He is a security and emergency industry professional with a highly diversified background derived from experiences in several industries. He's also an accomplished television host and producer, having created dozens of programs for networks such as Discovery, Travel Channel, Sci-Fi, and the Smithsonian channels. Many of those shows, such as Fact or Faked, Paranormal Files, Roswell, The Final Verdict, and UFO Witness, deal with the UFO and extraterrestrial contact subjects. As such, he is frequently interviewed for international syndicated radio programs, television programs, podcasts. If you haven't seen this guy on TV, you're not watching. He brings a unique perspective to UFO UAP studies with years of experience as a criminal investigator at the state and federal levels, combined with multiple licenses and certifications related to emergency and crisis management. As a licensed pilot, he is also working on trying to connect aviators with the rest of us to tell their stories about what they've seen as they fly in our friendly skies. Excuse me. With a background in behavioral science, much of his research has also been centered on the possible societal consequences of extraterrestrial contact and strategies to mollify the negative effects. He holds an executive master's degree in emergency and disaster management from Georgetown University, completed his undergraduate BA in sociology from University of Utah with an abnormal psychology emphasis. Please join me in welcoming Ben Hansen.
Thank you. Thank you. Sounds like a eulogy. He survived by his children, his wife. Well, before I start out, I wanted to thank, and I think we should give a big round of applause for the organizers, Nancy, her husband Kelly, and all the volunteers and staff here. I've put together events before, and it's no small task. And to be doing this for 35 years and have this event going, I hope you all appreciate and you give them thanks on your way out. And thank you for supporting this, because without you guys making the trip out here, these events wouldn't happen. So I'm really excited. I've always wanted to come to the Ozark conference. I'd heard about it a lot, and it's on my short list of conferences that I'd never done before. So this is beautiful, and thank you for coming up to my table and saying hi, and let's get into this. All right. Thank you, Mom. No, just kidding. She's not here. In the introduction, I do a lot of TV hosting and creating TV shows, and this lecture is going to be kind of a two-parter. I wanted to first talk about some of my favorite cases, and I think that'll be kind of fun for those who don't watch TV like me. I haven't even seen the whole season of my last show. I have been that busy and I don't have cable, and I like making the shows, but I don't really watch TV. That's okay. But there's some really cool stuff I want to share with you. And then because this is 2 hours, did you know it was going to be 2 hours long? With no break. No break. But you can, feel free to leave and come back when you want. About midway, I'm going to transition, and we're going to talk about societal consequences and if there's a game plan. Does the government is there a game plan for disclosure? And if so, what might happen? Kind of the what if scenarios, and I hope that you enjoy that part of it as well. I have not timed this talk, I've not timed it at all. I put a bunch of slides together and we see what happens. So I do want to save some time, hopefully towards the end, where we can take some questions. I think we have I think I'm the last one speaking today, so I'll try to save some time for questions towards the end, because in my opinion, of all the things that I study, and you can see I've done a series on ghosts. I've done a lot of appearances with ghost hunters, and fact or faked, we did cryptids, and we did Bigfoot, we did everything. I love all that stuff. But if you were to ask me what is the most impactful of what I research and what I've done, what's going to change the world most, I would say this subject, and what's going to happen perhaps in our lifetimes. So let's get into that. So the first series that I want to kind of highlight was called Alien Invasion. I didn't choose the title. Hudson Valley. Now, some of you might know that Hudson Valley, New York, Connecticut, that area was what we call a hot spot or a flap of sightings that kind of peaked during the 80s. And today, there are still many, many people reporting UFOs and other phenomena. So the series takes place, you can catch this on Discovery Plus, I think it's on demand. I joined up with Mark D'Antonio, who is MUFON's chief photo analyst, and also Melissa Tittle, who is my co-host on UFO Witness. And you can see it's very picturesque. It's upstate New York. Very woodsy, peaceful area, except that there's a lot of strangeness happening. And the locals there's a annual conference in Pine Bush you can go to. That's another one I haven't attended yet. As you really start digging into this, we got into talking to the locals and law enforcement, the mayors. There's a lot of people supporting this because they don't laugh it off. They lived through this during the 80s, when practically every weekend you could go out and you could see craft as huge as football fields that would fly over the highway, and triangles and things going back to the late 1800s that they called airships. We didn't have a concept of airships. There was two, I think, in all the United States, and the Navy owned them, and yet people were seeing these huge craft, okay, that were lit up and sauntering around. So at any rate, we met one witness named Bruce, and I don't have a clip of it here. I'm going to show some promo clips of some of the shows. I don't have permission to show the stuff that they own, but this individual, just kind of give you a little backstory, lived in a very rural area of New York, and he was sitting home alone one night, and he's getting ready for his favorite TV show to come on. And he had one of the old tube TVs. I want to say this was the late 70s. And his TV, right before the show comes on, goes staticky, and he's like, oh man, come on. So he goes to make a phone call. I can't remember what, a family member or something, to see if their TV had gone out. And on the phone, he hears a tone. He hears static, and he hears a tone. Okay, and through the TV and through the phone is a low, reverberating kind of a phase in and phase out, vroom, 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 vroom. And he's kind of freaking out now. He sits down, and he can't remember what happened, but all of a sudden his show is on, the end of his show. Okay, so the show has now ended. It was like an hour or more long. And about that time, I got the details a little bit fuzzy, but about that time he saw a huge light coming from the outside of his cabin, and it was hovering over, I call it a cabin, it's his home, but hovering over a grove of trees. And so as I'm interviewing him, I just got the idea, and I pulled out my iPad and pulled out a tone generator. And you can find this online for free. I didn't have anything planned, and it was going to tell me. And so I started messing with it and playing with the frequencies to try and see if he could remember what it sounded like. And I'm going to plug this in. Are you guys ready? See if my internet... let's wait for it to connect here really quick, and then I'll plug it in. If it doesn't work, we'll use our imaginations. Okay, let's try this. So I will warn you, it is grating. Okay, it's not the most pleasant sound. But what I did is I just took this and I started going up and down the scale and oscillating until he said that's it. So here's what we have. It was about there, which is about 179 hertz or so, backward and forward. And I played that for him, and he kind of got, his face kind of turned, a little bit pale. And later on the episode, if you watch it, we reproduced that sound hooked up to loudspeakers outside of his home, but we didn't tell Bruce we were doing it. So here we are filming. We had a whole film crew just up the little hill in the dense woods from his house. And I've got my thermal camera, and after we played that, I'm looking around the thermal camera, and there, by this tree, Mark spotted it first with his. He's like, guys, there's a figure, there's something over here right by this tree. And I brought my thermal camera out, and I start filming, and I'm like, yeah, there's something there. And I yelled out, I said, is there anybody here? Is that any of our crew? Wave your hand if that's you. Is there somebody here? Nothing. Nothing moves. And I'm like, there's something seriously, there's a humanoid figure right by this tree. And I started approaching it, and all of a sudden I hear, oh, hey. And it's Mark. I'm Bruce. Bruce had shown up. He had heard the tones we were broadcasting from his house, and he came out and he said, I had no idea, but I thought it was happening again. I came out just... So I guess we were on the money with it. But I show this just because I think we have to kind of move into as much of the science and the communication as we can to see if it is possible that we can sense patterns and establish communication and see what these things are. I have no idea, right? But that was one of my favorite parts of that show. And then Melissa went on to be my co-host in season 2 of UFO Witness. Now this one, season 2 has 8 episodes. The season 1, if anyone has seen this, was primarily based on, we can call him the grandfather, one of the pioneers of ufology, Dr. J. Allen Hynek. And there he is with his famous pipe. Oh, that's his glasses he's chewing on there, actually. But if you look here, in the closing scene of Close Encounters, he makes a cameo appearance. There's an interesting story there because Steven Spielberg borrowed his classification of Close Encounters without involving him in it. And so he went to Spielberg, hey, what's up? And he goes, oh, yes, Dr. Hynek. Do you want to be in the movie? Puts him in the final scene of one of my favorite E.T. movies ever. So Dr. Hynek, and some of you forgive me if you know these stories, but I'll kind of give you the back history of my involvement. 1966 in Dexter, Michigan, he was one of the chief consultants to Project Blue Book. So he gets called out to go to Dexter, Michigan because Frank Manor and his son, several police officers, and practically a whole sorority and other students at Hillsdale College, over 80 of them, had witnessed over several days not only lights, but also disc-shaped object that would kind of split into two, speed off, hover several hundred feet above a marsh. And I was just reading up on this today to refresh my memory. I guess the sororities, they lived in, the dormitories where they had curfew and they couldn't leave at a certain time of night. So they're all looking out the windows and gathering in tiny little dorm rooms, trying to look out the window to see what these things were. Okay, so a lot of people, some of them panicked, but just very intrigued, don't know what these things are. Well, we went to interview the sheriff, who was still alive. And the sheriff told me that Dr. Hynek came into town, and he drove him over to interview Frank Manor and some of the sorority students. He spent a couple hours, the afternoon, talking to these witnesses. And he could tell that Dr. Hynek was just intrigued by all this. It's not making any sense. So on the way back to the police station, he asked Dr. Hynek, well, doctor, what do you think? What do we got going on? And he looks at him and he says, I have no idea. I have no idea. He was perplexed. Well, when they got back to the police station, there was already a press conference waiting. And one of the, secretaries or someone, the sheriff came up to Dr. Hynek and said, Doctor, you have a call from Washington, D.C. in the other room. And he said, okay. He goes in the office. Sheriff tells me when he comes out, the doctor's face was completely changed. He had a blank, like he'd seen a ghost look on his face. And he comes out and he says, well, what'd they say? And Hynek says, it was swamp gas. And that's where he went in front of the press, and even the press, who had been ridiculing and mocking this subject for a while, were laughing at Dr. Hynek. Swamp gas? And if you remember Gerald Ford, I think he was a representative Congress at the time, this helped launch his career because he demanded that we have hearings on UFOs. Right? And it was the first congressional hearings that were kind of launched into that. And the review of Project Blue Book, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Okay? But this was a turning point because Dr. Hynek later went on to form CUFOS. He didn't want to be the patsy anymore, for the government, because he knew that there was something to this and they were calling the shots as if it was just a massive debunking campaign, for the public is a front, to just say we're doing something. So I want to show you this quick little video. This is me going back to the swamps of Michigan to test swamp gas. So we had a pyrotechnic expert create that with propane pumped underneath the water. That's what we had to do to get that effect. Okay, so the point was actual swamp gas can rise maybe a foot. A couple inches, maybe a foot, you would see, and it's very brief. Not something that goes several hundred feet up in the air like these witnesses were seeing, and that's how silly it was. So it's almost like a point we didn't have to prove, but it was important to me because I revere Dr. Hynek. And I appreciate what he did through his career and then afterwards to try and bring forward the truth. And so kind of following his footsteps, we had this last season, a really, really good video. And I'm a little disappointed that when it came down to the editing that this part was not included. I kind of encouraged and petitioned the network. It's like, come on, guys. You rented a plane for me to go and fly to recreate the speed and the intensity of this video. And it's not in the show. So they did this little bonus content. So it's not professionally polished and edited, okay? But in the very beginning, you're going to see, it was an event like this. Has anyone been to Contact in the Desert? No, couple people, one person? Okay, couple. It's a great conference. It used to be held at Joshua Tree, California. And several years ago, after the conference, about 30 people got together and went to a place called Giant Rock. And they had one night vision scope, and they started to do some CE5 things. I think they said they're meditating, and they started to see some lights. This light would kind of circle and do weird movements and swoop down. And then all of a sudden they heard jets. like military jets. And somebody, reminded the only guy who had the night vision camera, get your camera out. And this object, it looked like a horseshoe with two lights on the ends of it. Okay, you're going to see it zooming by them over giant rock. We think it was not lower than 100 feet, but probably a couple hundred feet above the rock. And it comes down, and then two jets came screaming after it. Okay, so there's no audio. This camera doesn't record audio, but you'll see it going, and then the jets trailing it, and then you'll see my recreation. It was a very, very windy day. I brought up another pilot for my safety pilot, and she has far more hours than I do. This is how we could do it to remain legal with the FAA, because I don't have my commercial license yet, but that's another story. But we had like a 30-knot wind, and I had to turn the plane probably about 30 degrees flying sideways to stay. And so, and the part where you see the video upside down, we really didn't fly upside down. I don't know why they didn't reverse the image of the GoPro. So here it goes.
This is awesome, and I think it gives us enough that I have an idea of what we could do with it.
Okay.
I'd like to do an experiment where we do like a size comparison. We actually have arranged for a Cessna, a nearby airport.
UFOs are almost never sighted this low, which gives Ben and Melissa
That's
the
the
rare
object.
opportunity to recreate the sighting. Ben will fly at the exact same altitude as the UFO. By filming Ben with the identical camera from the night of the sighting, the experiment will determine if the object was a conventional craft or a UFO.
We're looking for altitude, speed, size perspective. So all these dimensions with something that we know, okay? So this wind might be a little bit of a problem. All right, will you guys get set up and I will give you a call.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
All right, guys. Graham, so what I want you to do is be in position that you were the night of the incident. So, for instance, were you zoomed in on your camera?
No, I was not zoomed in.
Okay, so we want to imitate this exact same way that you were filming the incident, okay?
All right, so I'm here at the airport and I've pre-flighted the plane. I brought one of my pilot friends with me. Esther's there in the cockpit. She's gonna help look out for different airspaces and other air traffic because we are near a military operating area. And we're gonna take off in just a minute. The wind is rocking.
Traffic Cessna 35 Victor, picking 26 runway 26, and we'll be departing right traffic and to the east. 45, 50,
See, we weren't upside down.
55, rotate.
It's a straight headwind.
Yep. The test site's straight ahead. Watch that.
Wow, you feel that way?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's tacking you. It's gusting to like 30-some miles an hour, so.
Wow.
The object that night was only 400 feet off the desert floor. The low altitude is a deadly combination with the high winds.
Easy there, bucko.
Keep going this way because wind's going to push us this
That's
way.
right, yeah. You read? We're lined up. It's going to be difficult. This wind is really pushing us.
Copy.
We are in position, Ben. We are in position. Our cameras are up, and we are ready for you to fly over. What's your speed and altitude?
70 knots, 70 knots, and we are 400, 400 right above you.
Yeah, his height is good.
Here's where it's going to blow us. Come on, wind, leave me alone. Stop it, wind.
Is your camera rolling, Graham?
Yep.
All right.
With wind speeds increasing, Ben will have one chance to recreate the UFO sighting before heading back to the airport.
Slow this puppy down. That wind wants us.
It's scary.
Pretty amazing.
I hear him. All right, let's see if we can nail it.
It is a little bit hard to coming down altitude.
I've never been this low before.
Really?
I am sweating.
Awesome, perfect altitude.
Whew. Something I'll never do again.
Graham, did you get it?
Yep.
All right, Ben.
You can land the Eagle.
Copy that. We're heading back to the airport.
As Ben heads back,
All right, we won't play that whole thing, but that's the fun part of my job. And unfortunately, it takes the production budget sometimes of a TV show to let me do the things I really want to do all the time, right? The other pilot, it was funny because I'm like, you have what, how many, 10 times the hours that I do? And she's like, this is scary. We're so low. I've never been like this before. But we made it back okay. And I think that there's probably a lack of, TV programming and stuff that tries to analyze things nowadays and to do what we really should be doing at all levels within the government as well. And I'll get into that later, why I think the UAP task force, a lot of people kind of have this expectation they are going to be Project Blue Book. They're going to be the ones that are going out and doing field investigations. That is not the intent of the agency at all and right now. And so the burden is placed on us as private researchers, okay, to even do stuff like this, right? And I do think it's important. I heard earlier today a lot of people are interested in talking about this next place, and I'll kind of fill you in what I know there, because we call these hotspot areas where they're like laboratories. We can go back and we can have things happen perhaps again and again, like Trey, I think he gave the talk just before this. And these hotspot areas, I think, are kind of like the best chance we have of perhaps studying the phenomena, whatever it is. So let's talk about Skinwalker Ranch a little bit, okay? I will be careful how I say this. I don't want to insinuate that anyone stole an idea from me, but it was borrowed, okay? We had been pitching the idea of Skinwalker Ranch of a TV show many, many years ago. And it was really hard to get the networks to take notice of it because they'd never heard of it, right? For those of you who've never heard of it, welcome to the club. Skinwalker Ranch was made popular by George Knapp in his book, who's a host of Coast to Coast and, the Vegas TV reporter. And I would say that you could say that it's a parapalooza of everything. Everything happens there. You have poltergeist activity, you've got UFOs, you have cryptids, large wolf-like creatures. We're not going to get too much into the legend here, but an actual skinwalker is a Navajo tradition of a shaman Indian who is practiced black magic. Okay, within their own culture, if you believe that someone's a skinwalker, you're supposed to kill them. Okay, one of the theories is, because I grew up most of my life in Utah, is that the Ute Indian tribe had a curse placed on it by the Navajos. And this area is important and sacred to them. Okay, it's a part of eastern Utah. And nobody really understands or knows if it really has anything to do with the Native American tradition, or it's just one of those, I guess we could use the word portal, vortex, one of those strange areas where things come in and out. But there's a lot of animal mutilations. We don't have kids in here, do we? Small kids? Okay. A lot of animal mutilations that took place with the family that lived there, to the point that they were having so many cattle killed off and so many weird and crazy, scary things that they sold the ranch. Along comes Robert Bigelow, the billionaire who owns budget cars and hotels, and he buys it up, puts his science team there, and they hear the stories. Things like a 10,000-year-old supposedly extinct dire wolf, huge wolf, came up to one of the ranchers that stood as tall as their car was at its shoulder height. And the rancher shot it, I think it was like a .38 special, a pistol to begin with, and then a rifle. And the thing just kind of looks at him, trots off, and jumps over a 10-foot fence, right? Now, I have a friend who has had property in the area. If you've seen any shows with Jack Osborne and myself, we've had my friend Ryan Burns on a couple times on different shows. I did a show, Portals to Hell, and I did another one just recently with Jack and some comedians, Jamie Kennedy, and these guys just had me rolling the whole time. I'm like, are we here to investigate or just laugh? But we went out to his property, and Ryan had been taking photos and on the property of Skinwalker long before even Bigelow had purchased it. And this is one of his photos, I give it credit to him, of what he said was a bright light that appeared in the shape of kind of a human, and then something stepped out of it. Okay, now if you've read the book, you remember they were looking through a rifle scope and saw some sort of portal, and a creature came out on its feet and then scampered away. It stood up and then scampered away. So this is a pretty crazy photo that he took. The white thing being this doorway of some sort, and then this blurry image of a humanoid figure coming out of it. Okay? So when I went back with Jack and Katrina, here we are at Ryan's bed and breakfast. I could tell you stories there. We're not just talking about UFOs. We're talking about my producer friend who I was sharing a room with, and I came in late. I don't want to go on a tangent here, but it was so freaky. That place itself has a lot of paranormal activity. And I went and I came in really quiet, didn't want to wake him up. I opened the door and I could barely make out that he was asleep in bed. And he sat up and growled at me in like a demonic voice. He said, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Dude, what are you doing? Don't do that." And I was like, and some of you may know him. He's from Fact or Fake, my co-host Austin. He was a producer on this show. And I said, "Austin," and I was mad at him. I was so mad. It's like, "Why would you do that?" And I look at him. He's sitting up in bed, not answering me. And then he flops back down and goes back to sleep. And I shook him, and I tried to wake him up, and he sat up again and growled at me. And then he slowly came to and had no idea. He had no recollection of what he had done. So when we talk about these places, when I mean that I'm very open to interdimensional things, that's what I mean. How do you put a label on it and say it's only extraterrestrial, or it's only Bigfoot, it's only... As crazy as it sounds, I have a very open mind that some of this might overlap, right? And so, at any rate, here's an interesting story. I think this was on the show. They were going around, we were kind of tooling around one day, we weren't actually filming yet, and right in this little shed of the neighbor's property, they found a cat stuck underneath that doorway. Now, that doorway looks like there's a big gap there, but when you actually get up close to it, there's a cement pad that it's cemented on the inside of the shed. There's only a 2-inch gap, okay, between the door. And they found most of a cat. It was missing its head. And the body was inside and we couldn't find the head. And we're thinking, how could something pull with enough strength, but no, there wasn't any blood that I saw, pull on an animal, just pop its head off through that little gap, and then the body's just inside. So it's just really odd things like that. I mean, I can see a cat being strangled if someone didn't see it, like, oops, shut the door. You know, cat's like, eh. But there wasn't any evidence of that. You know, it reminds me of that scene in Dumb and Dumber, like our pets are missing their heads, like. So, Skinwalker Ranch for me has a very special place, and like I said, I have been very interested in it even before I met Brandon Fugel, the owner, who's a good friend of mine. And if you haven't seen it, it's a very, very successful show now. And the whole idea of having these laboratories where we can go and have things kind of repeating over and over is something that it's a dream of mine. So I want to talk about a place now that's very close to you if you live around here. I can't give the exact location, but there is a researcher, Ted Phillips, protege to Dr. Hynek, who I believe has spoken at this conference maybe more than a couple times. And he was based in Missouri, and he had a location that he called Marley Woods. Now, Marley Woods, I will say, it's not too far from Springfield. Okay, so I'll give that much out. He was very careful about protecting the identity of the ranchers who didn't want people coming in and making a spectacle of it. But he'd been there for a long time, and Dr. Jacques Vallée, who you might have heard of, right? He's been in this for a long time. He's been both at Skinwalker Ranch and at Marley Woods, and he even said he believed there's more activity at Marley Woods. Okay? So this is not the actual shed where I'm going to tell you a little story here, but it was very close to here. The rancher had a prized horse, his favorite horse, and he was grooming the horse and taking care of it. And then he went off to the ranch for about 10 to 15 minutes. He had to go do something else. So he leaves the horse there. He comes back and the horse is gone. There's no corral that has been destroyed, nothing that he can figure out where the horse had jumped over. There's no sign of someone loading up and taking it. So he searched for quite a while in this little pasture, and then he decided to go into the barn. Well, I don't remember how long it had been since he had been in that barn, but it had been, I think, months, at least. It just wasn't used. In fact, I think the padlock chain was still through the lock itself. And as he opens the door, what's left of his horse is splattered on the walls. The guts, the intestines, everything, as if the horse had been exploded by a bomb from the inside. And it really disturbed him, and this was about the time where he just was beginning to hear other stories from other ranchers. A lot of this was orb activity, and I'm not talking about the orb that shows up in your camera. I'm talking about bright, size of a volleyball, blue, sometimes orange or yellow, intelligently controlled. The orbs that follow your car, okay, and that trail your car as they're driving around and freaking people out. Another story was a little girl was jumping on her trampoline, and she fell down, and I think, that part where the springs are between the trampoline and the holes, and she fell down in there. She's screaming bloody murder. Her mom's watching from the kitchen. She looks out the window and sees her little girl, but what she also sees is a bright blue orb about the size of a volleyball hovering right over her little girl. Now, she comes out, and I've read the reports that Ted took the statements and everything from the mother. She comes out yelling explicatives, we'll just say, okay? You get away from my daughter, you bleep and bleep. Doesn't know what this thing is. It goes like this. It turns and zooms up right in front of the mom and stops 2 feet away from her face. The mom's frozen in fear, and then it turns like this and just kind of fades away. Okay, so an intelligence with intent. These types of things occurred quite frequently in the area where, Ted had witnessed large winged sort of creatures, heard them flapping their wings right near his little, base camp, and so many strange things, even a cryptid where there was a radio station DJ. He went to work one morning and saw 2 huge, what he described, polar bear creatures, 8 to 10 feet on their hind legs. And then Ted captured a photo of something that looked like a very large dog or some type of creature. All these are blurry, I know. It's cliche, isn't it? They're always blurry. But you were also dealing with technology back then. I think this was actual film camera. I don't think this was digital, and all they had to work with the focus, but whatever. He has samples of the hair that was left. It was analyzed. They caught some on one of the fences, and it came back unknown. Didn't match any canine or anything that they knew. So Ted did so much research. I'm really hoping that we can get more of that out and share with you, that we can get back to places like Marley Woods, crop circles, things like that, and these orbs that would keep appearing. Okay, well, let me show you one quick video. Now, this is not the greatest, I'll forewarn you, because I was using a new app with my thermal camera, and I didn't realize the reticle would show up, okay, in the video recording. So if you look in the crosshairs, I went up into a tree stand and decided to film with this, and so Melissa and the crew are down below. And I see this light, and it's showing up hot, okay? So it's a hot object that doesn't look like it's bounding, it doesn't look like it's walking, it's like floating across the pasture. I'm like, guys, there's something out there. And so I send them to go after it. And then you're right? You send Melissa, she's the newbie. You guys go check it out, okay? Let me know if it does anything to you. It just faded away. And I lost it. It just faded away. And they were close enough. If it was a rabbit, if it was a deer, if you didn't see it, you would probably hear it scampering at least. And so this is what that looks like.
Hey guys, I got something. Something out in the field. It's moving. It's hot. You see this, Tom?
It's right in the middle of the crosshair there.
Right here, straight over the pasture.
Yeah.
Dang. It's moving through the field. Away. It's by itself. It could be a deer, but from here it looks like a blob. I'm zooming in.
So again, technology, that was user error. I apologize. But I pointed a laser at it, which you wouldn't see on the thermal, and I'm trying to direct them towards it. It's right here. It's right here. They go up to it and can't find it. The same thing happened with Ted Phillips when they were up there waiting on the ridge because they were seeing what he called ambers. There's these lights that would appear and disappear up on the ridge, and one day they brought up their rental car, and just before all this started, those birds that you hear in the background, the insects, went silent, and the rental car, the automatic locks started opening and closing, and the horn started honking. Just like a scene from Close Encounters, right? And they're all like, something's gonna happen, and these lights start appearing. They filmed them for quite some time, and then they took one of their guys and they said, you drive your car towards the ridge and we'll be in radio contact. So they send him out, and the guy in the car is like, I can't see where they're at. And they're like, it's right in front of you. Tap your brakes. So he taps his brakes so you can see the brake lights. Yes, you're right in front of it. And what they discovered was that if you were slightly to the right or slightly to the left of a different perspective, it was unidirectional. You could only see it in a certain direction. Right? And so we're discovering things like that as well. Why do I have to be lined up just in this particular place? Well, it's not strange when I interview witnesses for them to have a very different description of objects depending on where they're standing. Right? And I don't have time to really get into kind of my sightings, but I was with my now wife. We saw a triangular black triangle, and she describes the inside of the triangle, bottom of it, quite differently than I do. I can't explain that, right? Could it be just because of where we're looking at it? Or the person themselves has a different, connection with it? I don't know. So let's talk about one of my other favorite places. Well, this is a very close place to where I live, hot spot, Catalina Island. So if you know anything about the Nimitz, and what Sean is going to be talking about tomorrow and those experiences, Kevin Day, the radar operator, told me that just about every one of those objects, when they would appeared around Catalina Island off the coast of California, and they would disappear down at Guadalupe, okay, which is off the coast of Ensenada, Mexico, several hundred miles away, which incidentally is where most of the Shark Week shows are filmed. It's a hot spot for great whites too. I went cage diving there and it was amazing. I digress. What's that? So at any rate, there might be some connection to the unique marine life, but one thing we do think there might be some connection to is if you look at the marine geology here, you can't probably see it there as much, but this is Catalina, okay? And this is San Clemente, which is pretty much managed and run by the U.S. Navy. Okay, they do the demolition, underwater demolition training for their SEALs and everything down here. But off the back of Catalina, where those lines come together really close, that means it's a drop-off. Okay, it goes from a depth of here. Let's see if we can pick out a depth. This says 4,000, 3,000. Obviously, this is the shore, so it goes down to 4,000 feet right off the backside of that, and the same back here, 5,000 feet, at more than a mile off the back of San Clemente. Okay, so we thought this was interesting because there's always been reported magnetic anomalies in the area. In fact, if you go to the aeronautical charts for pilots, there's a warning on the chart, and it says beware, there might be as much as, I think it says, I want to say 30 degrees would be too much, I don't know, in deviation with your compass, that you need to be really careful around the area. Well, we talked to a geologist who didn't want to be a part of our program, but he sent me these survey maps. This is a magnetic, they fly magnetometers over the area to look for places that might be good for oil and for other things like that. If you look, this is Catalina, okay? That reddish area right here. And then, how did that get turned around? I am sorry. It must have been a late night. This map should not be upside down, okay? It's sideways. But there's a gray area right here off of San Clemente, which indicates the most intense magnetic readings that you can get, pretty much. Okay, so you have an intense hot spot on the backside of Catalina and San Clemente. So what we decided to do was head right towards that hot spot. There's also a couple features underwater. This one's called the Emery Knoll, and it's not on here, Catalina Crater. There's papers written where geologists aren't quite sure how they were formed. Now, I'm not saying that aliens made, okay? This is not Ancient Aliens. No offense to my friends on that show. But I am saying that they don't know if it was volcanic. They don't know how the natural feature was made. There are a lot of transverse fault lines in the area here, okay, that go back and forth. So it's seismically active, but it's an anomalous area. Okay, we'll just leave it at that. Well, guess what the Navy decided to do in 1969 was something called the Rock Site Project. They said, let's do some surveys here and see if it's possible that we could build a permanent submarine base to actually park submarines. Kind of a little sketch here, the 1960s. Let's put a submarine and tunnel it into the island, and it can dock in here, we can work on it. Why would they do this? Their purpose, they said, was they were really worried about during the Cold War that if Russia did nuke us, that they could have submarines with the nation's most important people, I guess, put the scientists, the politicians, and their friends in the submarine, and they could go live in an underwater base for a couple years until it was safe to come back up. Lucky them, right? Leave the rest of us up here. Well, apparently, they said that it was too expensive and just wasn't worth. I think at the same time they were building that similar, I can't remember the name of it, but it's outside of DC. I think it was in West Virginia. They still use the facility for other things now, right? But the idea was that would be the place where the world's most important people can go. Well, in our investigation, I love diving. We did go diving at that hot spot location that we could get to. And I went down, and you can see in the TV show, there's a pinnacle that comes up about, the depth I think was about 80 feet or so. And I just wanted to kind of see and get the layout of how much it dropped off and see what magnetic readings I was getting. And I did watch my compass completely swivel around, and it was more than 30 degrees. It was very drastic. Because 30 is, I think the maps said it was something like 10 degrees is what could happen. So this was much more than that. So again, I'm not claiming this is alien. I'm not claiming anything that this is evidence of an alien base. What I am saying is, if you wanted to build something or hide something, or if there was some reason that attracted you to a place of unique geology, Catalina would be one of the places to go. And that whole area from Catalina to the Channel Islands and everything that's out there. All right. So let's move on now. How many of us are kind of sick of how the media, let's say mainstream news, has treated the UFO topic? Right? All right. Yeah, I guess we can clap for that. We're sick of it. All right. Thank you. I do my best, and I have no control over how my shows are edited and stuff, but I do my best to not make anything a laughing matter. And I hope that those who've seen my shows, with the witnesses even, I don't feel that it's my job to judge or to call them liars or to do anything like that. Unless I absolutely know that they're hoaxing something, I'll take them down, okay? But the media, I do think, has made a shift quite a bit. I want to show you just a quick little video. This is Entertainment Tonight, okay? So obviously, it's for entertainment, kind of laughing and stuff, but as much as it's fun to do these, and I have fun with them. We all have fun when I do these things. It kind of gets old. You know, that you're like the person at the party who's not cool. You're trying too hard to be funny. And a lot of this isn't funny anymore. So here we go.
About aliens, because it's 2021 and why not?
It feels like the only thing that's left, right, Nichelle? So UFO sightings have gone up 51% during the pandemic.
I believe it.
And now there's a new show trying to figure out why. We are calling this our Out of This World ET exclusive.
Pilots describe the object as a white, 40-foot-long, tic-tac-shaped craft.
If there are more sightings, if the aliens are coming, why now?
A lot of people believe that our world is headed down a wrong path. The environment, politics, we're going to destroy ourselves, and they're here to protect us, to warn us.
Hostile aliens, missing time.
I want to go check it out for myself.
Need a break from planet Earth? Well, former FBI agent Ben Hansen's got you covered with UFO Witness, streaming now on Discovery Plus. The show talks to alleged UFO witnesses and gives us all a glimpse into the possibility of life beyond our planet.
Bulky-looking creatures, they're not from this world. I guarantee that.
Over the years, celebs like Kurt Russell, Miley Cyrus, and the Kardashians have all reported UFO sightings.
I think Kendall Jenner first reported one in 2013. Her sister Chloe's like, yeah, I believe you. I lent them some night vision equipment, okay? So they go to Area 51 and have some fun with the night vision gear, comes back, with some makeup on it. The ladies were very appreciative, but they're really into this. Celebrities are reporting them all the time. You have Victoria Beckham, Mick Jagger, Russell Crowe, although we were able to explain, I think his sighting was actually a ship with a light on the mast that he took a picture of.
Okay, Nichelle, not to freak you or anyone out even more.
I'm already freaked out, Lord.
I feel like they're already here, and we might get more information. The government has until June to declassify and release more of what they know about apparent UFOs.
Are you Lauren or Lauren's alien twin? I'm just wondering.
I gotta fly away.
Yeah. I was on an Australian news station, a morning show similar to this, and the host actually asked me to unzip my face to reveal that I was a reptilian, and I'm like, it's fun, and I can have a joke just as well as the next person, but you know what they say about humor, I do think a lot of this comes from the uncomfortable feeling, right, that people don't know how to deal with this because it's becoming serious. It's becoming serious when, in the same breath, you're telling me that we had congressional hearings, right, and that we have official I guess you could say, acknowledgement that this could be a potential national security threat. Okay? So the question then is, well, why now? And I was thinking about this just last night, so some of my slides might be upside down. I think one of the reasons is that a lot of U.S. politicians, presidents, have now indicated a public interest in this. And if you watch the Jimmy Kimmel interviews, he interviewed several presidents and the campaign with Hillary Clinton and all that. He'd always ask them if they looked into the subject, or what they would do. And I did some body language analysis that kind of made the rounds in the media, and I don't claim to be an expert. It was more of a professional hobby of mine, but I felt like most of the presidents, I'm not saying that they know, but I would say I'd summarize that they know enough not to ask anymore. Okay, because you got that sense of hesitation, nervousness, anxiety, stress. Okay, a lot of that was my conclusion. But then you also have scientific discoveries that suggest that ET life is nearly inevitable. We're always hearing about exoplanets now. We have this many thousands of exoplanets. Oh, no, now there's 10,000, now there's 1 million. I've talked to the NASA astrobiologists, and it's pretty much an accepted fact now. They believe, and some of them come out and they believe within 10 years even, that it's very probable we're going to discover signatures of life, okay, on another planet. And we'll get into that in a minute too. Then we have public trust in the government is near historic lows. Okay, so I found this little chart yesterday. You're not going to be able to read it. UFOs should not be political, okay? Everything's political, but it shouldn't be a political issue, so I'm not going to point out which president here has the lowest public trust, okay? But throughout the years, you can see way back from 1960, in general, the presidents all across the board were now down to about, I think it was 10% or less of the people believe that the government is capable and mostly truthful about things. All right? Way down from 75, 80% back in the 60s. So if people don't trust in their government, that can also increase their belief that there's more that the government's not telling us. And that's what another thing I think has added to this. And then finally, the media has latched on to these Navy videos. Okay, the leak that happened and the government authenticating that, oh, remember when we told you that we weren't investigating UFOs? Oh, well, we were, since Project Blue Book, we've had things going on. And so now they come out and the media has latched on to that. And then members of Congress in turn have taken up that torch. I talked to, I should say we owe a lot of credit to people like Chris Mellon. Okay, people like that who have been the instigators to keep pushing Congress. Because I do believe if it wasn't for these people who were former DIA, former defense, former people that have come out and told Congress, if it wasn't for them, Congress wouldn't pick this up, right? It's been my sad experience that most people in government will not do anything unless their job is on the line or they're being forced to do something about it. Sorry, I've worked for the government too, for those who are in here, but you know what I'm talking about. You stay in your lane, you do what you're assigned to do, but you don't take extracurricular activities and causes, right? You just do what your mandate is. And if Congress hadn't picked this up, there wouldn't be that pressure. So now we saw the joking side of it, but I do think the stigma is starting to ease a little bit. So before we get into the next subject, I just wanted to give you a sample of some recent things that I've done. And all these newscasters do it with a straight face, which is really cool.
Government. So these two guys know a thing or two. Ben, let me start with you. Are we actually going to learn anything tomorrow? I always wonder if congressional hearings are just, for grandstanding, or if we're actually going to be kind of blown away.
Mark Holsey is a former F-18 fighter pilot. This August, he was piloting a private jet off the coast of Los Angeles when he says he saw as many as 7 mysterious objects appearing to fly thousands of feet above him. This is audio from that night alerting air traffic control.
They are going around in circles, so maybe 3 aircraft.
Roger,
Yeah, I don't know. You're not entering any military airspace or anything. I'm not sure.
The clip obtained by Ben Hansen, a researcher who has spoken to dozens of pilots of commercial flights that have recently had similar encounters.
Quickly to you, Ben, the Daily Mail had a story on this where they had a bunch of different sightings from Wisconsin on the 1st and 2nd of December. Has the government, has the Pentagon, has anyone tried to explain what these sightings might have been?
Well, I think, Tucker, as you've covered before, one of the main problems here is we're all waiting for this UAP task force to come out with their new report, and they're just getting up to speed, but they don't have a mechanism for civilians really to make a report to a government agency or someone that's going to take this seriously. All right. With the exception of Tucker, who's grinning there, I didn't, because I couldn't see him when I was doing that interview. He could see me. I had no idea. My sister took a screenshot. He had sort of a scowl, and I had the same one. It's like, you don't have to be that serious about the subject. But at any rate, I do think as we talk about stigma, and now we're going to transition into this next subject here, that is one of the positive notes, is that it's becoming okay to talk about this. And I think you've probably sensed it as well, right? You can talk to maybe your neighbors. You can talk about maybe a TV show because it's ubiquitous. There's so many shows and people discussing this, right? And so it becomes okay. If we have scientific papers being done on it, if we have a UFO task force on it, if we have presidents and, people, and now it's cool because the media is actually jumping on the government for laughing. They bring this up at the White House press conference like, oh, you think it's funny? I see you grinning. I can see you. It's not funny. And they're like, oh, okay. I thought it was still okay to make jokes. It's like, what are we dealing with here? So I did something crazy last year. And I convinced my wife to let me go back to school while she took care of our 2 kids. And I did kind of an accelerated program at Georgetown to finish up my master's in emergency disaster management. And they never told me that there was an actual thesis paper. I really do not like writing. I thought it was just going to be sort of a project of some sort. But when it came down to it, and I was supposed to write a thesis, I convinced them to let me do it on the social impacts of ET disclosure. No, I didn't title it that, okay? I was like, if I'm going to get this in, the title is Predicting the Consequences of what I call Global Compromising Events, all right? So what I'm going to try and do now, and I hope you find this interesting, this is the more academic part, and I'm going to try to keep it entertaining because most academic things are kind of dry. But I think I found some things that you might find interesting and something that I developed here. So within disaster management, they talk about what we call black swan events, right? Now 9/11 was one of these. We call it a novel crisis. It's something that is so out of left field, but it can be so catastrophic that we don't plan for these. Okay, I mean, we think about them perhaps. Did you know that there were plans? They had, not plans I should say, but they considered the possibility that planes might be flown into skyscrapers. They just didn't feel that it was that probable that they would devote more resources to have a mitigation plan for it. Okay, so along with that, they trained for what they call the maximum of maximum scenarios. So with Hurricane Katrina, they actually had a tabletop exercise. I think it was only a few months before the actual event took place. And they had planned, of a sizable hurricane. They just didn't expect one to be even bigger than what they'd planned for. Okay, and a lot of the lessons learned were not implemented into the response for Katrina. So if you read the 9/11 Commission report, they talk about having a lack of imagination. And what that means is, of course, if you don't think big enough, and you don't think strange enough, and you don't think about the things we think are ridiculous, you're not going to be ready. And so the idea now is like, let's think about the strange. Let's think about the weird. And therefore, if nothing like that happens, we're still better off. We're still better prepared. We can handle anything, right? Well, I think we learned a lot from COVID-19. Okay? And don't worry, there's nothing political about this. If I do say anything political, it's going to be against both sides. I don't talk, politics, religion, and controversial things among friends or people I still want to talk to. So, what we're really dealing with during COVID-19 was kind of a existential crisis. Okay, people are questioning the reality in a way, and I'll get into that in a minute. We're only beginning to have the research come back as to the side effects of what happened during COVID, okay? But I started thinking about this, and I'm like, is there a type of black swan event that could be more psychologically intense? Meaning, it's not necessarily a physical threat as much as it is you're questioning your own place in the universe. And what would that look like? Okay, would you have different consequences and different response from people? If it was more about, I'm not going to die because an asteroid is going to strike me, but my whole world and where I believe I fit in the universe could change. So I came up with a term called a reality compromising event. And we won't read the whole definition, but basically, it's a psychological sort of event that has the potential to transform the human psyche. Okay, so what happens is internally, you go through this transformation, and some people, all of us to some degree, but some people aren't able to cope. They don't have the resilience, and so that starts to leak externally. And when it leaks externally, we can get bad behavior. Okay, and we can have societal consequences. So let me give you a couple examples. My thesis advisor came up with some of these. What if, tomorrow we discover that time travel is possible, right? And we could actually get in some DeLorean or something and travel back, change time or whatever. I mean, how would that blow your mind, right? Or what if you could suddenly take your consciousness, download it, and implant it into an AI drone of some sort? So you don't have to say goodbye to your parents. When they die, you just download their consciousness and put it into a very real-looking robot, right? And then you can have your mom around forever. Spooky. But, it's not out of the realm of thinking of some people who are working with AI right now. Or what if we could talk to animals? Okay, and they've got little apps now of different words and things that your dog can push a button when it's hungry and it actually talks to you, right? So your pets have a vocabulary. It's kind of spooky. But what if we just put on, like some earbuds and now you can talk to your animals? I mean, would a lot of us become vegetarian then? And then what if plants? Oh, that would be a problem, right? Why are you cutting me? And then religiously, a lot of people believe, like in a rapture event, where literally, they'll be taken up into the clouds in a second coming. But how would that look if we're sitting here and half of you, let's see, which is the good half? This side? Okay. This side just disappears. And the rest of us are like, oops, missed that boat, right? But how would that change our reality and we go on to keep living, knowing that this all of a sudden was undeniable? It's undeniable in your face. So let's take and forgive me for this, but as I'm talking to people at the conference, I realize not a lot of people perhaps I hear, hey, I drugged my husband or I drugged my wife here and they're not into this. And so I don't want to start out assuming that everyone has read the background and history of ufology, okay? And so I'm going to whip through it really quick. But it is important to understand that during the 40s and 50s, there was an explosion of UFO sightings, right? We had July, the summer of 47, of course, you had the pilot Kenneth Arnold, okay, in Washington, and that made the paper because he kind of coined the term, skipping like a saucer. right? And so that turned into UFO saucers, and then we had Roswell happen. Okay, the Army, Air Force announced that they captured a flying disc and then recanted it really quick, right? And then in 52, we had the DC flyover. It shocks me that, not that the mainstream media doesn't know about this, but a lot of the UFO field who are casually interested don't know that over 2 weekends in July, we had dozens of UFOs hovering over the White House and the Capitol building. We scrambled jets. This is well documented. And as soon as we'd show up, they would disappear. And then they'd come back on radar, and they would go after them again. And this happened over 2 weekends. Okay, so what transpired, the government started to get worried. And they said, you know, this could cause a national security threat or panic. And so in 1953, the CIA sponsored what they called the Robertson Panel. Okay, and they got together some really smart people. I think even Albert Einstein was a peripheral member of it. And J. Allen Hynek was in there. And actually, there's a picture. You can't really see it in here. But they got them together, and they started kind of, met a couple times only, but they reviewed a little bit of the history of UFOs. And there were some academic studies, but not many. Okay, we're going to talk about the most important one in a second. But they recommended at the end of the day that if we do have information of that we've been visited, we should not tell the public, because it would be mass hysteria. And they actually recommended a debunking campaign. Okay, and this is where the Air Force policy actually was born. It came into place of ridicule, mocking. In fact, the panel even recommended, as a side note, that they could use cartoons produced by Walt Disney specifically to further the debunking campaign and remove the aura of mystery around UFOs. So if Disney can make us some cute, cuddly aliens, make it light and fun, then people won't think this is such a scary thing. Okay? Well, what research formed the basis of this? And I know some of you know the answer to this question. Anyone want to take a stab of it? What main paper research did they use? It was the 1938 War of the Worlds radio broadcast. Okay? So Orson Welles, CBS Radio, the night before Halloween, in 1938, does this dramatized radio thing that we probably all heard about it. Some of you may have been around at that time to hear it. I don't know. It's hard to say how many people actually heard the broadcast. But what we are able to say is that the newspapers the next day, about 12,000 newspapers, ran the story that there was mass panic. Okay? Now I'm going to play you just a little excerpt so you can hear. Now don't judge these people too harshly. Okay? Don't say, oh, they were so gullible in their time. They're fools. Remember, most people got their information from radio, and they had no reason to really distrust it. Okay? But several times through the broadcast, they took commercial breaks and said, this is a dramatization. And then they're like, oh, well, they were listening to another radio station, then they tuned in and only heard, that we were being attacked by aliens. Okay, so this is what it sounds like.
Something's happening. Humped shape is rising out of the pit. I can make out a small beam of light against a mirror. What's that? There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror, and it leaps right at the advancing men. It strikes them head on. Lord, they're turning into flames. Oh, the whole field's caught up by the woods, the barns, the gas tanks of the automobiles, spreading everywhere. It's coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
Silence.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue the broadcast from Grover's Mill. Evidently, there's some difficulty with our field transmission.
So, if you listen to the whole thing, it's fun. It's on YouTube. They talk about the ship opening up, like, there's something coming out of it. Look, it's reaching out. Oh, my goodness. Well, they said that of about the estimated 6 million people, now this was Cantrell et al. Who did this study, of the 6 million people they believe heard it, 1 million of them were frightened or disturbed. Okay, so what does that word panic even mean? That's one of the criticisms of this study. Does it mean you're running around with your hair on fire? What did people do when they said they were panicked? The criticisms are that they really couldn't find anyone who went to the hospital. Nobody died. But what I think is useful is they analyzed the gullibility of who was the most vulnerable to be gullible, if that makes sense. So it was people who would look for confirmation bias. So for example, if you said, you turned on the radio, and they're like, we're asking these towns to evacuate, get out of your house now. Well, the people who believed that was real would go outside, they look around and there's nobody here. They must have already left, right? We got to get in the car. We got to head for the hills. The people who thought, oh, this is just a radio show, maybe looked outside and said, yep, nobody's running around. You see that the same observation, but your confirmation bias confirms what you already wanted to believe. Okay? So what happens at this point? Well, because of the Air Force used this as well, and Project Blue Book went up to about 1969, they closed it because they said there was no information that any of the sightings had indicated a national security threat. So in the early 60s, NASA commissioned the Brookings Institute report. Okay, and you don't have to read all this. Basically, the take-home points with this is they deliver a report to Congress, and they said, okay, let's look at disclosure again. We know what Robertson panel said, and they didn't take as much of a black and white stance on it. It was more middle of the road. Okay, they even talked about unification. Okay, which is what the former recent presidents have done. Reagan made some statements, Clinton made statements, and they're all like, if we could all come together, if an extraterrestrial threat came, it might bring us together. That's a great idea, and I think that's a possibility. We'll discuss in a minute. But NASA was looking 20 years out, and their line of thinking was, it's going to take 20 years for us to receive a message and respond, and for that extraterrestrial civilization to even get here. So don't worry about it. It's not going to happen in 20 years. Okay? And they cited Cantrell et al. Because they said there were concerns of society disintegrating, and so they needed to be really careful of it because they compared it to Columbus coming to the Americas. And whenever there's a superior technological advanced civilization, what happens to the lesser advanced? If they survive, it's like a massive culture shock, right? And pretty much everything else wiped out. Okay? Well, they said it could be very unpredictable. So what they tried to do then was provide some assessment tools. And this was actually SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. They adopted what they call the Torino scale. And if you look up here, I don't know if you can see this, but on this side, they're looking at near-Earth impacts of asteroids. And so how much energy would that asteroid hit us with versus the plausibility we'd have a collision. And you get a number here, and then you go over here to this scale, and it's like, okay, look up your number here. Oh, it would be a collision, would be catastrophic. What does that mean? To who? Although it is interesting, if you want to study an asteroid strike, and you tell me we have 72 hours to live, okay, great. Why would we even care so much? It'd be nice to know what people are going to do with their last 72 hours, but we're all going to be dead. So what's really the point of studying that? I argue that an asteroid strike is so completely different than receiving the news that we are not alone in the universe, but they're not 20 light years away. They're here right now. And they've been here for decades. It's ludicrous to even make this comparison, to try and study this as a scale. So then they came up with the Rio scale, which they've adopted in 2003. This one's better. I'm not knocking them. Good for them for doing something, right? But they have this equation, and they're like, okay, well, we receive a message. And you can see here it was like is it specifically for Earth? Or is it just like a beacon of a signal we pick up? What's the type of discovery? Okay, can we repeat it? Do we keep getting a message? Is it transitory just one time? How far away is it? How reliable is the source that picked it up? And then we come up with this formula, and then we get a scale again. Insignificant versus extraordinary, okay? The problem with this scale that critics say is the values are arbitrary. Why? Because we've never even had a near-Earth asteroid strike, let alone a near disclosure of aliens. We have no idea what kind of impact. We call this an unknown unknown. We don't even know the variables to measure. Okay, but yet they are trying to come up with some scale to quantify it. Well, then we had 2017. So this is when the New York Times does a story. We've been spending $22 million on a semi-secret program. They authenticate the videos of the Navy. Okay. Well, if you looked at the Gallup polls, after that time, 68% of Americans believe the government knows more about UFOs than they're telling the public. Okay, so the public in general is already, I believe, in this camp of like, okay, we're ready, or it's no surprise to us you've been lying to us already, right, for all this time. And then Congress gets involved, and we're not going to rehash everything, but last year was a really big year. I was at school. I was in D.C. when the report had come out, and I think that was a year before. The report in June, and then May the next year, I was in school, and I called up the network, and I was like, because it was I think a Friday, they announced that they were going to have the first UFO congressional hearing since the 60s, and it was going to happen, I think, on Tuesday morning. And I was like, called the network, and I'm like, do you guys want me to stay here? This is huge. And I just thought naively that I could just wander into the halls of Congress. I didn't know you had to have a special press pass, right? I'm like, hey, I'm with Discovery. Can I just sit in on this hearing? But yeah, so they didn't keep me there. I went home. But I watched it, and a lot of people were disappointed. A lot of people were like, I didn't hear anything. They didn't tell me. What were you expecting? I thought it was huge. That we're actually talking about this, and they said for the very first time, okay, let's go back to here. The very first time the government has officially acknowledged the situation as a possible national security threat. The very first time that I could say officially, because you could talk about the Twining memo, and everything that came out there, and it said that it is real and not imaginary and all that, okay? But Congress was ordered to provide continuous reports, okay? And here's the Deputy Director, Scott Bray. If those of you who watched it, that part was funny. I mean, the questions, the bumbling, the like, well, they couldn't get their videos to work. I'm like, you guys are in charge of the UFO investigations and you don't know how to operate a PowerPoint. I have an excuse. I've only had one slide that was upside down right now, okay? So at any rate, they were taking the easy fruit, I think, and just saying, hey, we've explained this one. It's a good start. It's a good start that we were doing this, okay? Well, if you didn't know, I'm making, if you're, on social media at all, put this in your calendar, because next Wednesday at 10:30 Eastern Time, the Senate is having another open hearing on UFOs. So Senator Gillibrand and Rubio and them calling them on the carpet and telling the DOD, we gave you authorization in the National Defense Authorization Act with all this money to fund the UAP Task Force, now called ARROW, and you haven't given them all the money. Why not? And as of right now, the director, Kirkpatrick, is the only speaker that's listed. But I will say it's not just rumors. We do know that several witnesses have been interviewed by Congress, and have been told and prepped that when the next round comes along, they will be talking about things such as nuclear warheads being shut down by UFOs, possibly legacy projects, meaning they worked on recovered craft and things that existed. And that is already getting lined up. I don't think that's probably going to take place on Wednesday. I think they're probably going to talk about budgeting and why they don't have their money. Okay, so it's probably going to be kind of uneventful. But brace yourself, because I think 2023 could be a big year. Okay, now how big? How big? That's the question, right? Well, look at the timeline here. Oh, it's still small. I can't even read that. But this far left side is War of the Worlds, okay? And if you move along here, we have the Robertson panel, Brookings report, then kind of a long period where we don't think anything's really happened, but we know we probably were investigating UFOs. And then down here, we have all this flurry within the past couple of years of congressional interest, okay? Well, we've kind of come full circle now, because now it's a national security threat, and these risk assessment tools are terribly inaccurate. They're inadequate, I should say. Okay, so let me get to the real interesting part of all this, and I don't want you to go home and be scared about what I'm going to show you. I'm not a doomsdayer. Okay, I always look at the worst case scenarios so that I'm always prepared. Okay, it's not they, whoever they are, that I necessarily fear. It's we. And so if you take anything home, I want to just show you so that maybe you can start having discussions with others, and you can sit down and have maybe a philosophical, by the fire, or drinks or whatever you do, and talk about this stuff. Okay? So what happens then? SETI has been working on something they had called the Post-Detection Task Force. Okay, they've reorganized now at St. Andrews in Scotland, and I was at a conference with some of those people who are part of that group. But do you remember the big Arecibo radio telescope in Puerto Rico? It unfortunately, the cable snapped in the center element, and it crashed down into the dish, and they don't have money to fix it. And I was there for school, actually, and I spent another couple days to go do some filming for the network at the observatory. Again, I was pretty naive. I actually tried contacting SETI, and they said, well, it's during COVID, and we don't have any scientists that are there, especially on a Sunday. But I decided to go up anyways. So I drove up through the jungles, and there's a little guard shack right here. And I wasn't just going to run in there, right? But I went up and I didn't think anyone was there, and suddenly a guy appeared and he's like, hey, we're closed. I was like, oh man. I was like, look, I'm Discovery and stuff. Can I just walk in and we can go look at the dish? He's like, there's nobody here that can take you on a tour. I'm like, can I use your bathroom? So here's me taking a selfie after I was just over in the restroom, and I don't know if this is an omen, but there was no toilet paper, there was no soap, there was no paper towels. I couldn't go to the restroom, and I was like, is this the future of SETI? The sad reality, okay, is that SETI, as good as they're doing, and all the stuff that I think is important, I'm not saying stop looking to the stars, but I think there needs to be a shift in what Dr. Alexander Wendt, we're working on out of Ohio State. I was just back there, and a bunch of PhDs got to. It was really intimidating because I don't have a PhD. And everyone else was sitting there, philosophizing and writing papers, and I presented my paper. And we're trying to get some journals to publish these. Okay, but Dr. Alexander Wendt talks about near SETI and far SETI. Far SETI is the thing that we're stuck on right now, looking for these signals and astrobiological, technosignatures and things coming from exoplanets, right? Whereas we're trying to get near SETI. We're trying to have SETI look at what evidence may exist right here, right now, right? And it's very, very hard. The military, in the meantime, is looking at UAP incursions, and they have to. I'm not criticizing that. But if you want any action done by the DoD and the Pentagon, they, in their budgeting and everything, have to look at it like a threat. Okay, so I don't think we should criticize them because it is a threat. It is a threat. If half or more of these are benevolent, great. We'll sit down, we'll have lunch, take me on a ride, we'll learn about their culture, maybe it'll all work out great. But from the point of view, when you can't control your own airspace, it's like Lou Elizondo said, you lock up your doors at night and set your alarm, to your house. And you go around, you do all the checks, but in the morning, you wake up and there's muddy footprints in your house. And you're like, who was here? And you don't know who was in because nothing is stolen. So they're not hurting me. I got to clean up the mud, right? But you don't know what they want. But isn't that a little disturbing that they can come in and out whenever they want to? And then I add to this analogy, I haven't told Lou this, but I think he should use this. What do you tell the children? We are the children. Are you going to sit the kids down like, well, kids, for several decades now, we've been having nightly visits by someone we don't know what they want. We don't want you to worry, but we've had to keep it from you because we didn't want you to panic. Okay, so you see where we are in this scenario. Well, all right. We did have, I guess you could say, the unfortunate experience of having a global pandemic. Do not misread what I'm saying to you. It had devastating physical consequences. Well, many of us in this room probably had people who succumbed to it. And I feel for your loss. I think we all know people. I'm not saying that it didn't have detrimental physical effects. What I want to point out to you is that it also had a psychological influence that had nothing to do really with the physical. Okay, so our reactions to it, if you look at the research I'm going to show you in a second, the question is, was this an outlier event? Or did it run contrary to contemporary theory on panic? Okay, well, we had some minor, I'd say moderate reality shifts. We had to wear masks, social distancing, can't go to school, quarantining. It was hard. It was really hard to adjust to that. But it was kind of a microcosm, RCE, the reality compromising event, of what I believe could happen 1,000 times greater or more, in the ET disclosure. So let me give you a couple examples. We saw increased crime. Okay, now during most disasters, crime goes down. Property crime can sometimes increase, and domestic violence, because people are cooped in. And if you already had problems in your marriage or whatever, now you start fighting, more violence. But in general, crime goes down. Well, during COVID, unfortunately, homicide jumped nearly 49% in the U.S. 49%. Now, a lot of apologists will say, well, that was because we had a summer of riots. We had the George Floyd, killing and the rioting that took place, and that was probably offsetting what normally would have gone down, but everything increased. So we don't really know, okay? But then we had panic buying. Okay, now this is what we call perceived scarcity, and I don't need to rehash this because you lived it. You lived it, but I will tell you the experts I talked to, with the grocery chains, they plan for about 2 weeks of food. 2 weeks from the producer to the warehouse to your grocer. So what's on the shelf they can replace. They should have enough under normal conditions for 2 weeks, okay? Well, when the news puts out stories that there's a scarcity of toilet paper, and you go to Costco, and you're like, I heard something about, oh my goodness! And there's some lady, with a shopping cart full of it coming out, and you're like, maybe I better buy some toilet paper. And so you buy some. And then we do have a logistical supply problem. I have some news for you, everybody. During COVID, nobody was crapping more than they were before. Okay? There was no increase in crapping. There was no increase in the population. We were using the same toilet paper as we were before. Okay? It was because of the perceived scarcity that panic buying happened. Now, initially. Because then what did happen is they had to retool because more people weren't at work. This is an interesting side note. Now, you go home and tell people this. You sound smart. People weren't using the industrial toilet paper, which is like the single ply, probably the stuff that you find out here in the bathroom. The commercial industrial toilet paper is different than your domestic, 2-ply soft Charmin. And so the companies that were making the industrial, like nobody's buying this because no one's going to the office. And they're buying more home toilet paper. And so they had to retool. So there was a shortage at that point when they had to relearn that market, right? But if you went to the restaurant supply places, there's a tip for you. Go down to the restaurant supply stores and you might find toilet paper. So like I said, so what happened then is this is an example we call social amplification of risk. So in brief, before I show you the scary map, all of the, in my paper, all of the research that I had looked at says overwhelmingly people do not panic in disasters and emergencies, overwhelmingly. But the problem is, in my opinion, most of that research was done on natural disasters and sudden onset events. Like if we had a fire in this room, most people would organize, would be rational, and they would help, and they would filter out of here, and we wouldn't be trampling each other, usually, okay? But you can't, in my opinion, say that that is the same as something that is a psychologically intensive event. You know what? Most of us have heard about hurricanes. Even if you don't live in a place that is hurricane prone, you probably know what hurricanes can do. You get tornadoes here, right? You know what to do when a siren happens. You know the basics of it, and you know what tornadoes can and can't do. They might pick you up in your bathtub and drop you off like a mile away. But a tornado's not going to get to you perhaps underground or things like that. We have some familiarity with it. With ETs, extraterrestrial life, we have a huge swath of unknown unknowns. Okay? And so I'm going to show you that in a minute, what makes up that formula, but I want to now talk to you about cascading effects. When the media gets involved, when we talk with our, what do we call informal channels, okay, so we get most of our news now through informal channels, your friends, your family, your social media. We don't as much rely on the government and scientists, especially after COVID, okay? Both sides of the political aisle failed with risk communication, miserably, because the communication was not consistent, the messages were completely muddled, and every 2 weeks they change their mind. And you're told that masks work and then they don't work, and the vaccines, is this effective and then it's not. And again, don't accuse me of taking a side politically. I'm just telling you that it was a massive, in the study, is a massive failure, okay? So what happens then is we're getting all of our information from different sources, and we are in danger of what we call cascading effects, okay? So here it comes. Now, you probably cannot read each individual thing. I'm going to read just a couple to you, okay? I believe at the very top here, this is an RCA crisis. ET existence is revealed as this top box. Okay, and this is what we call first order. The next color is a second order consequence. The next color is a third order, fourth order. It goes all the way like 7 or 8 orders of consequence. Okay, so when ET existence is revealed, it creates economic panic. Okay, remember, this is not the physical threat. ET didn't come down and vaporize your bank, okay? you're just concerned about your money because of the change in the announcement. And so economic panic happens. The stock market collapses. There's a run on the banks, okay? And then financial institutions shut down. The banks do close down. And then you follow this line over here. Violence and looting at the grocery stores and retail because you can't buy your food, so you have to steal it. That creates overcrowding the jails and the prisons, okay? Which in turn, now because people can't get money and people aren't working because they're worried about eating, then you've got martial law declared, right? And then closing of more businesses. And then over here, education, schools, elections are suspended. Kids aren't getting the education they need, housing shortage, blah, 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 blah. A lot of these lines loop back up. I didn't write down one effect more than once, is what I'm saying. There's a loop, and so it feeds back into itself, a causal loop. Now, if you're thinking this is hyperbole and this is like science fiction, every single one of these events, with the exception of complete martial law, which did happen in some countries, and complete infrastructure like utility shutdown, every single one of the things happened in COVID in less than a year. Okay? So I do believe, as I kind of bring this back and maybe have time for some questions here, this could create the perfect storm of events. Casper Senetal and some of these others that I've listed up here, what they did was, what was my favorite part of the research, they all talked about kind of a formula of what they call the dread risk factor. So one of the things is, how dreadful is the risk? How do we perceive it? Well, if you look at these items here, the volume of the message, okay, COVID was global, everyone was talking about it, but I think that ET Disclosure will be even a quicker wildfire of media. If that announcement especially is made like on a Friday afternoon, okay? Every news station, every media outlet in the world will be talking about it. Disputed information, how much disputed information did we have in COVID? Who do we trust? What expert? You're telling me completely different things about vaccines and masks and everything. Where are the experts with ufology? I don't even like using the word expert for me, but where's the media going to go to get this information? You going to go to the government? The government is in a very bad position. You have two choices. You either tell the people you've been lying to them for decades, or, which is not a comforting message, or you say, we know as much about it as you do. Not another comforting message. So if you can't get the answers from them, and science has been ignoring it and laughing at it, you go to your friend Bob down the street who saw a UFO. Or they come to you because you've seen them, right? And I wouldn't say that we're the best experts on what to do or say, okay? So then you get into all this other stuff. One last one I really want to focus on is the voluntariness of the event. They've found that the more control you have in volunteering to be part of something, the more willing you are to engage in it. And that's why people take bigger risks if they have some control. That's why people, they consider, driving, which is far more dangerous than flying. But you have far more people who are willing to drive their cars because flying, you give the control to the pilot, right? And it's a scarier thing that you don't have any control what happens there. Where does that put us with the UFO subject? If the government were to even imply that some of these abductions are true, even if they implied that it's true, it doesn't matter if they are. The perception that you could be in your rural home or in suburbia, and you could have an extraterrestrial being come and take you from your bed, and what the movies suggest, that you're going to be probed, you're going to be implanted, all these horrible things are going to happen to you. The voluntariness of that is, I can't do anything about it. And so that dread risk factor skyrockets. Oh. So all of this stuff If we add this up, I argue that it's the perfect scenario for high-stakes risk perception. And if you were to ask me, how's it going to go? Are we going to come out of this okay? Right? I say it depends. It depends. And the kind of conclusion to my paper was, I want to, have some hope. I want to have some optimism to this. And so I use the example of a stool, a three-legged stool. Okay? And if you take the different legs of it, the nature of the revelation would be like, how quickly does the message come out? What do they tell us? Do they just say, hey, we found some microbes on Mars? Or do they say, they're here now? And, oh, by the way, why don't we invite one to come up and speak to us? Okay? So how quickly is the intensity of it? We may not like this, but I started to kind of put together what I would do if I was consulting for the government. I call it my mitigation playbook. You either have the drip method, which is little by little, giving little drips to us of information, or the rip off the Band-Aid. Which do you think is probably the safer? The drip method. And so a lot of people argue that's what they've been doing with us. Right? You want bigger drips before it melts, right? The other leg here, the capability of the crisis planners. Can they stay ahead of the news? Can they manage that threat perception and maintain trust with the public? Ooh. That's tough coming off of the COVID game. And I would argue that if there are secret keepers, they need to start sharing this plan if they do have one, because I'll tell you what, there is no official plan. I have looked, I have searched, I've talked to former FEMA administrators. If there is a plan, they're not sharing it with the, I guess you could say the parent agencies like FEMA. Okay, so at some point, they've got to integrate with the structure that's already in place to be effective, I believe. I don't think even the secret keepers would have enough power to just be able to make the plan work. Okay? So in other words, we've got to maintain the trust somehow or gain it back. And so really quick, one of the things I would do would be to come out and say, look, Roswell, okay, we have now learned, yes, that was a real event. Yes, we did recover craft, bodies, whatever. But those were other times. We didn't make those decisions. The people back then did what they thought was best for us. And you exonerate the witnesses that you made fun of, that you threatened with their lives. You do all of that like we've done, perhaps Native Americans or people that we have wronged. And you go back and you do that. And so there's a way to kind of repair some of it. But they have to stay ahead of the game. We're assuming that we're in control of the message. What if they come down and say, we're tired of waiting? And like, boom, Phoenix lights in every major city. Boom, 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 boom. And it's undeniable. Okay, so now we don't have control over anything. So the final leg would be our resilience. What can we do mentally? Is there anything that we can do mentally that we can have, I guess, a mental exercise that we can prepare our minds for this? And now I am remembering, there was a few more slides here, I'll get through really quick. But studies have shown that people who have familiarity with disasters, it might help them, but it may not. It's kind of a toss-up, because if you know how to respond to a hurricane, it might make you feel more safe about hurricanes. But if you were in a car crash that was really bad, it might traumatize you, and you don't want to drive again, right? And so how do we get familiar with extraterrestrials? If I go for a jog, which I don't jog much anymore, but you stretch. You do a light workout before you stretch to warm up those muscles, because you don't want them to snap, right? And we could have a psychological snap is what I'm worried about if we don't warm up to it, right? And so just kind of speeding ahead here, the argument, they've been preparing us, Hollywood is doing this. It's nice to entertain that idea, but how do you make Hollywood do anything? NASA tried, they wrote a 22-page letter to Steven Spielberg trying to get him not to make Close Encounters. They thought it would end up like Jaws was the summer before, that people would freak out. And he said, no, I'm going to make it without your help. I'll do it anyways, right? So do we gain firsthand experience? How do you will that upon yourself? Anyone here want to say, come abduct me tonight? I want my firsthand experience. So at any rate, the findings of the research were that there are significant gaps that exist in our understanding of these psychologically based crises that I call reality compromising events. And I do think we need more scholarly discourse. I think we need to be talking about it more in the media. A good person that you would know, I don't want to put his name out there right now, but he's very high up, formerly in government, took my paper and passed it around to some people back in Congress and stuff, and he said, I'll tell you, nobody's talking about this. Nobody's talking about the consequences. And neither is SETI, neither the scientists. I've talked to the NASA astrobiologists, and they're like, well, it's kind of a joke. It's kind of a thing, like, what would we do if we discovered it? I probably wouldn't just go out and tell the world. I'd ask my supervisor what I should do, but there should be some protocols in place. I'm like, yeah, there should. And we should agree upon them perhaps as countries so that someone in Ecuador doesn't, get the first definitive evidence and go put it out to the world without talking to the other countries. So call me, responsible, but I think there needs to be a plan here. Anyways, some cool studies, things that we're talking about belief and what happens, what I call contra-realities. So all of us probably have a friend, or maybe you are, a serious conspiracy theorist, and I hate using that term. But if you believe something, let's use one that's easier to digest, a flat earther, okay? I'm sorry if I offended you if you are. But what happens if you take someone who believes the earth is flat and you get Elon Musk to take them up in a craft, do a spaceship, and we look down like, oh boy, doesn't look flat to me now. How does that person's reality change, and what happens to them psychologically if that was a central feature of their reality and existence? And you can kind of study this. You can look at people who grew up in cults and had to escape and things like that, and the belief systems they try to maintain and what they try to do. But we really need to understand this. Because my ending thought, before I can take a couple questions here, it does not take that cascading map I showed you, the majority of people to panic. I'm not saying that the theorists of old were wrong. Most people, I think, will get through this. But it only takes a certain minority to meet a threshold. If you get a couple people panicking, and there's a shooting over here at this grocery store, and then the media is going to explode that across the country, and you're going to think, well, my grocery store's not safe. I can't go there now. And your boss says, you know what? This is a very difficult time. Take 2 weeks off. Every employer needs to tell their people to go home for 2 weeks to be with their families and loved ones. We heard that. 2 weeks turned into months, turned into years. We cannot do that. Society has to have some way of going on because of how integrated we are. It'll be much worse than I can't get my microchip from China because the factory is shut down and now I can't build a car. There's no cars available. Much worse. So, on that happy note, I hope that we start having more of these discussions, and that we don't have to have this full scale RCE, and that we can all get through this. So thank you for allowing me to kind of present and discuss the topic. And before everyone starts to leave, I just want to let you know I would love to chat and talk with y'all. I have to leave to Roswell to participate in a dig of a new location tomorrow morning, so I will not be here all weekend. So before dinner and everything, when we're done with the questions, I'll go back downstairs. I I do have, some cool metal signs and merch, but that's where I'll be to say goodbye. And I'll be at the dinner, if you're doing the dinner. But then I'm out. So anyways, thank you. Let's go ahead.
What do you know about what I keep hearing about, this thing called Project Bluebeam?
In what sense?
Well, I'm not sure. That's why I'm asking you. I keep hearing it's a government thing where they're going to be able to project 3D images in the sky. Is this anything you ever heard about?
Oh, yeah, I've heard about it.
Okay.
Look, I'm not going to say that it's like weather manipulation and stuff. I'm not going to say that it's completely ridiculous that the government hasn't tried doing things like that. Of course they've tried. DARPA is involved in so many different things. I personally haven't seen evidence that we have the capability. For example, that was mentioned that 9/11 were just planes projected into the buildings and then they were, demolished at the same time. And I would think that would be a long stretch to say that we could create mass sightings just by holograms. And then I would also say, I'm not opposed to considering things like that, but it involves a lot of people and it's different times than it was back then. It's really hard if you look at the leaks that just came out in this past week with military and stuff, right? If someone were so opposed to something ethically like that, I think we would have in our time more leakers and people coming out and not allowing that sort of thing. That's what I would hope. So I would probably say there's not a great chance of it, but that's just my gut feeling. I have no evidence for or against. Yep.
So would you agree that the government can't really keep secrets? They can keep stuff, but not secrets, because people run the government and people want to talk.
Yep, I'd say in general. The problem with the UFO topic is that these ones have been buried so long that I've always argued the more I learn about the government, I think the less they know, that it's been squirreled away into private industry. And it's so fractured now. There's a piece of it over here, a piece of it over there. And if there is a secret-keeping group, it's very small. Because they're not telling the SecDef and maybe some of the recent, or they know enough of it, but they're not really briefing your head of the PR at the Pentagon and stuff. It's a liability. Why would they tell them? So when they say to you, we don't have information on that, they could honestly be telling you the truth. That they do not have information on that, right?
Plausible deniability.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. So, with your media connection and you having access to networks to disseminate a lot of information you already have with the programs and the studies you've done, and now with your academic study and knowing the consequences of a reality-changing event, and knowing that you would be one of the experts if disclosure happened, do you feel any obligation in like your television shows or your public events to try to start the stretch before the jog with disclosure? And if you do feel that obligation, what would you do to help avoid the cascading consequences that you plotted out?
I will be the first to tell you, I don't wield any power in the shows that I'm in. I don't do any of the editing and the recent stuff. When I do my YouTube channel things, I edit and I'm very careful about what I say. And I would say most of the networks have good intentions, but they're entertainment, right? That's their bottom line. And if someone is interested in cupcake wars, they're going to make a show about cupcake wars, right? And so with this topic, I wish and I hope, if I could guide it, that there would be less. Look, let's just stick to the facts and the stories and tell both the good and the bad. I don't like when people are like, you're focusing, only on the negative and the scary stuff, and these beings are benevolent. They wouldn't hurt anybody. We don't know that. But we also don't know, those stories do need to be told, but I can tell you every abductee that I've talked to never was talking about, sunshine and roses when it happened. They came to terms with it, but it is frightening. And I think people need to know the frightening aspect, and they need to know the possibility that that some, it could be all the above, are loving and helpful. And so when it comes to like what kind of message, I think my job, if I have a job, is just to get the conversation going and get people okay talking to it. So I'm working with, some people like Ryan Graves, with the pilots and that initiative of getting protections for pilots to come forward, and working within the academic community so that they feel that they're not at risk with their professions, and I think that's kind of where maybe I fit in, because I don't really see myself as an expert. I just feel that we need to have more discussion. Yeah, thank you. Anybody else?
If you were the alien looking down at your current map, how do you think they would perceive how we would react?
I guess first, to answer your question with another question, we're assuming, do they even care? Kevin Day, the radar operator of Nimitz, made an observation that he said, I kind of felt like watching these things on the radar screen. We would scramble, we'd go out, and they'd disappear, and they'd come back, kind of like in DC. And he said, it's almost like they're pigeons in a park. And we show up, the pigeons are doing their thing, and then we disturb them, and we come back. And he's like, I don't even know if we're really as much of an interest or part of the equation. So that would be my first thing. But would they care? Well, if they care, then hopefully at some point soon, we get definitive, I guess, a line on what their motive is and what they want, because they've had perhaps millennia, to come and tell us, how they feel about us. So that's one of the difficult things is we all try to put this in one box too. We say they are all this way or that. We could be being visited by multiple. And then you get into the whole thing is, are we being actually visited, or is it interdimensional? Have they been here? And that's one of the biggest problems. How do you study something you can't even define from the beginning? Right? And so it is one of the greatest, mysteries of humanity, and I don't know if I'm even going to see it in my lifetime, so I don't know.
Last question.
You mentioned for the RCE crisis of drawing comparisons to COVID with regards to an alien appearance. And I was just wondering if you could elaborate a bit on the kind of economic effects you see, because COVID was obviously a very isolationist type event, and an alien invasion, or not invasion is the incorrect term, but an alien appearance would be, as it's been portrayed in many things, would be kind of a bringing humanity together, because it would be kind of an external thing. So I was wondering if you could elaborate on kind of your economic perspective or just any other kind of perspective of society of how it would react to that in terms, because you were drawing many comparisons to COVID, so I was wondering if you could draw some differences, how you would see it.
That's a good question. I would say, first of all, disaster managers look at most disasters what they call an all hazards approach. So they can't make a specific plan for each type of event. What they found is that most events share more in common than they don't. Okay, so for example, with risk messaging, you have a hurricane or you have a wildfire. You're pretty much going to use the same text messaging, public announcements, and stuff for both. You don't need to reinvent something. So when it comes to the economic, I think we saw how interconnected we were, or we didn't really realize globally, if you mess with one part of it, across the globe over here, we're affected as well, and how quickly that can come down. So I think what you're getting at, like with ET Disclosure, everything that I showed you with the banks closing down, the stock market collapsing, we can almost guarantee that's going to happen. Almost guaranteed. And it has nothing to do with, again, like the physical. It's not an earthquake. It's not like the system was taken down. It's the fact that you told people to stay home and the stock market is uncertain. What do you put stocks in? Are you even concerned about stocks? Is anyone concerned about money, or do I just, who can think about work, when it's all plastered across every news station and everything else? And that's going to take a long time to get through if we do like the rip off the Band-Aid method. Now, if it were more of a drip method spread over several years or maybe even decades, you might see an easier transition. So like, let's say they had a little bit of information that like, okay, there's microbes in Mars. You might see more of a shift towards aerospace, towards new technology in the technology field and away from some of other things because they're preparing for that. Does that make sense? I mean, I'm not an expert in economy, but...
That's fine. I was interested. So you're basically pointing out that the concerns are relatively minor. So obviously something like COVID, the economy basically...
Well, anything that happened in COVID could happen exponentially worse with ET.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think that's the point, and then it just all depends on how it rolls out, how quickly, how intense, and obviously there'd be a lot of shifting. Would we even have our money exchange and stuff, or would it be taken to the Middle Ages again, where we're bartering and selling with goods? You know, look at what's happening with the dollar right now. We're about to be replaced as the standard for the global standard, you know? So that itself is scary. So be not afraid. I think most of us will get through it. We're living in very interesting times, you know? You say go back to bed? Oh, yeah. I'd get myself a horse and buggy. It would be great. All right, thank you.
Okay, this is the last question.
Okay, last one.
I'm hungry. Sorry.
Hi, nice to meet you, Hungry. Okay, I just wanted to make a couple of statements. It was interesting you said about Katrina and how there was a simulation a few months before that. Much the same way with COVID, there was an event 201 that was done a few months before that came out. So I know there's a lot of fear with COVID, and they drummed it up, you're going to die. Why does the government feel a need to, I mean, with these aliens, you said there was the big die wolf that was beside the car. The guy went and shot it. He didn't lose his head. The orbs that you see, they didn't attack you. These spacecraft that the rockets were going after, I mean, not rockets, jets were going after, they weren't attacked. So why does the government have to present it to the people as, you know, and actually there are whistleblowers saying that the government has had, or CIA has had information that they're going to do a simulated alien attack, but it will be them. And with the dire straits of our economy right now, and that was the first thing you led to, people are going to run to the bank. Oh my God, aliens, let me go to the bank. You know, I just don't see that. But I do see that as a cover. Do you have any information
so
on that?
what exactly the question? The what?
No, there wasn't a question. I'm just drawing parallels. That's all. Just parallels that I'm seeing and just saying, keeping an open mind on everything.
As to whether it might be
Why does it always
not
have
a physical
to be fear?
threat?
Yeah. It's always fear that they try to present it as. If they've been around since, 1947? Which was actually, Dolores Cannon said that we did have an uptick in alien presence after the Hiroshima and Nagasaki because we had this technology of the nuclear bomb, which we were obviously misusing, and they were coming to check because that kind of stuff reverberates through the galaxy.
I can definitely understand that. I think you have to understand the military perspective, though, and why they exist, right, to protect us. And so anything they do has to be couched as a risk or threat or hazard, right? And so I would argue that even scrambling jets to try and chase something, it's more than rumored, but we possibly could have lost jets. You know, not that they shot us down, but it's significant risk anytime you scramble jets in that manner anyways to respond to something. So and that's not even to say that like all of the thousands of stories of abductions, you know, if you were to tell someone who's gone through something very dramatic they're not here to hurt you, some of them would really disagree with you. Now, them, meaning it could be all the above, like I said. Some might be benevolent, some may not. So I think you do have to keep talking about the threat perspective, but there does need to be a balance. There does need to be some sort of like, hey, well, they haven't done this over this many years, but I do have a problem with people who say it's all love and light and they're here to save us. Again, you're saying all of them. You know, we have had the nuclear bomb. We've had several world wars. We've had all this. And like, did they come in and stop that from happening? You know, maybe it's non-intervention. Maybe they're not supposed to do anything. Or maybe there's factions, you know, whatever. So it's very complex. I don't think we can just paint it with a broad stroke and say it's all this way. So anyways, You guys have been great. Thank you.